Hello, everyone. This is criminal profiler Pat Brown, and today we're doing a very historic profiling segment. This is the 1950 disappearance of this gentleman. His name is Richard Cox, and he was a West Point cadet, only West Point cadet to have ever disappeared and never been found. And it's a very interesting case. It was a huge manhunt trying to find this guy, and there's half a dozen theories as to what could have happened to him, but very little information actually on the internet. It's odd in that way. There is a short grunge video of 10 minutes. There's Wikipedia, which of course I will refer to a little bit. There's a couple YouTubers who did some basic stuff, and there's this book, Oblivion, and that book is what I've read and where I have my origami bookmarks in, which is what I'm going to do some reading to you from this, because you're going to find out a lot more by what I have to read from this book. A little bit more details about what actually happened, who said what, and what the actual theories were. Way more than you're going to get anyplace else. So, which is why a lot of people, they hear these different theories. Oh, this is what happened to the guy. And they're like, oh yeah, I bet that happened. Really? Well, this is a profiling channel. So I want you to be able to hear the different theories and help me decide which one is the most plausible of the theories. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. Hold on, already toasty. All right. I want to welcome everybody who is here in the chat room. This is a live show for people who are with Patreon, which is right here. If you'd like to be with Patreon and be at the live shows, there are 8 per month. There's 2 every week. There's a hangout during the week where I do a lot of news and opinion and people ask questions. And can you just tell us about this case? Short stuff. And then I do a case show every weekend that I analyze, profile, and those are the 2 I do every week. And we have a nice community as well. And that's $5 a month. Please do join. It supports this educational channel. But you don't have to do that. Everything is public. Once the show is done, once the live shows are done, a week later, I make them all public. And every one of them is at my channel. So please do subscribe to the channel. Check my playlist for things you're interested in. Please hit the bell for notifications. That's really important. And you can always support the channel through buying my books or the little $sign or whatever. Anyway, that's that. Let me get... I want to say hello to people in the chat room. I didn't get to say hello yet. I said hello before the show started. So I just want to welcome who just rolled in, if I can even figure out who just rolled in. We have a pretty good group here today. And some of you have said you haven't heard of this case. Wait. Okay. Sometimes I see these conversations and I'm like, what's going on over here? Anyway, all right, let's get to this case. Now, the basics of this case are this. His name is Richard Colvin Cox. He was born in 1928, and he disappeared on the 14th of January in 1950. So what is he? Trying to figure out how old he was. 21? Is that correct? Can't exactly add when you have to figure out where the birthdays are in the year. He was an American second-year cadet who disappeared from the United States Military Academy at West Point, New York. In January of 1950, he was visited by a man whose first name may have been George. And we'll get into may have been George. Was it George or was it not George? And then that's part of the problem in this case. A man who was supposedly maybe named George. And George had visited him 3 times over the course of a week. According to an eyewitness account from another cadet, the 2 men seemed to know each other. On the 3rd occasion, Cox and George left the grounds of the academy and were never seen again. Cox is the only West Point cadet to have disappeared without a trace. So that is just the basics of it. And then we're going to get into the details. Somebody already going, boyfriend? And I'm going to where do I want to start with this? Before I get into all the details, I will throw out the 6 main theories so you can stick them in your head. And then we'll go to who he was, what happened right at the time it happened, and then what possible theory could there be on him. So let me show you a couple of theories. And these pictures, I'm going to link this website because I think there was a kind of cool website, and I'm not even sure where these pictures came from. I don't know if these are true detective things or were out at the time, or whether I have no idea. I couldn't find anything on the website that said where, but I will point you in that direction so that you can check out the website. I thought it was cool, and I thank whoever put those up for putting them up. Okay, so now let me explain the 6 theories. And before I do that, just a really quick thing, just so you know, one more thing about Cox before I go on. He was an exemplary student. He was raised in the Midwest by his mom. His mom was a Christian Scientist. His father died when he was, I believe, 11 years old. He was the youngest of 6 kids, 1 other brother and 4 sisters, and he joined the military right out of high school. Okay, got that? He was an exemplary student, class president in his sophomore year, member of the National High School Honor Society as a senior, active in intramural sports, and sports editor for his high school yearbook. So successful in high school. He graduated in 1946 and enlisted in the Army. And we're going to go back over the actual Army stuff in a minute, but just keep the time frame in mind when you think about the different theories and his age. He graduated in 1946 and enlisted in the Army. After basic training, he was sent to the just created post-war border between East and West Germany. This is after World War II. So they created the border, and they had this new stuff they had to do because of the created border. Working in intelligence and rising to the rank of sergeant. Not exactly. Let me pull this up right now. Not exactly accurate. So let me tell you what actually happened to him. So because the Army career is very important. So he was successful in high school, and appeared to be successful in the Army and successful at West Point. So there was nothing about him that stood out as being, he had major problems and couldn't keep up or any of that stuff. None of that is there. But let me read you a little bit from this book about his actual career, because this to me is very important. And if you're going to say certain things might have happened to him, a lot of it has to do with his Army career. All right, so let me read a little bit more about that. So he entered the Army in 1946 in September, and went to Camp Atterbury, Indiana. All right, and then from there he went to Fort Knox, Kentucky for basic training. All right, pretty much everybody does that. To learn of this period in Cox's life, the author of this book talked to Bud Groner. That was his best friend throughout the Army, and so he has more information probably than most people. Cox and Groner first met at Knox, although at the time it was only a casual acquaintance. All right. Then in January of 1947, so now let's get this straight. 1946, he enters the Army, gets his basic training and stuff. Then in 1947, he is transferred to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, to await shipment overseas. All right. And then he gets to know Groner a little bit more. Then they leave in February of 1947. They arrive in Bremerhaven, New Jersey, and there they go to a replacement depot at Marburg. And then they were assigned to the 6th Constabulary Regiment in Coburg near the East German border. All right. This is not intelligence work. So a lot of times they just talk about, oh, he was in intelligence. And a lot of people think, oh, well, that's really very meaningful. He was all kinds of, very important top secret stuff going on. He was in the constabulary for 6 months. Now listen to this. So Groner, his buddy, joined the maintenance section, and Cox joined he was at the intelligence section. All right. But what he was doing there, by the way, was he doing intelligence work? Not really. The constabulary's job was to man border posts and run patrols. That is not major, anything deep and dark and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of like being a security guard. All right. It says across the border, just beyond the barbed wire and minefields, and less than a football field away, there were East German and Soviet troops armed with machine guns and watching the Americans through binoculars and all that. And it goes on to say here that it was a lawless atmosphere at the border, a black market. There were incidents of assault, theft, rape, and even murder. Some of the crimes went unreported. Others resulted in army court-martials. All right, so then what happened is, after 6 months, they both left Coburg when the 6th Constabulary was disbanded, and Groner went to a different location. And where did Cox go to? He went to Schweinfurt. All right, so they kept in touch, spent some weekends together because they were 100 miles apart, but they spent some time together. And so Cox seemed to be okay there. He was a good athlete, played on the basketball team. And again, nothing particular about any great, secretive work or anything. Remember, he's just 19 years old. All right. It doesn't have great training in anything. So he's probably just doing what a grunt pretty much does. It said he had an attractive German girlfriend. And during this time, he applied for and received his appointment at the military academy. So in January 1948, he returned home. So he was only actually in the Army for a year. He returned home started to attend West Point, and his buddy was discharged from the Army and went back to civilian life. And that's basically it. He was said to be a good soldier, dependable, unassuming, and friendly, although somewhat of a loner. People described him as one who liked a good time, but who stayed out of trouble, someone who was proud of his reputation and his personal appearance. A couple people said he gambled. The rest said he did not. Some said he was a lousy drinker. If he had 2 drinks, he'd get ill or fall asleep. So, and one other thing they said was they thought he traded, somebody said. Now, I want to point out the word, this phrase, somebody said. Well, I'm putting that in here, but somebody said. And unless you can verify what somebody said, a lot of people say a lot of crap. I hate to think of, something happened to me, what everybody in town would start saying about me. Pat Brown said this, Pat Brown said that, Pat Brown did this, Pat Brown did that. And probably 90% of it would be fabrications. So this person said that he traded cigarettes on the black market, but only in a minor way, and was basically quite honest and a straight arrow. All right, but keep that in mind. The worst thing they could come up with for him was that he might have, somebody said, traded some cigarettes on the black market. Okay, so that's sort of the basics of that, and I'm going to get to some more about him. But now he's in West Point, his 2nd year, and he disappears. So I'm going to give you the basic ideas of the theories now, and then we'll go to in depth on those. All right. So right above here, we have romantic secrets. What are those? Let's see. Romantic secrets. Oh, that he might have fallen in, mind you. Oh, he was, by the way, he was engaged or semi-engaged to a woman from back home. And they had seen each other last time he was on leave. They thought about getting married. And then they planned they were going to wait till spring. And then when he's on next leave, they would get married. Okay. So he had a girlfriend who was now a fiance. She knew the family. He wrote nice letters to his mother about his fiance. And so supposedly, he was getting married. And they say here, so for the romance part of it, there are some who believe he fell in love with a woman who was not the one he was engaged to. He might have met her in Germany, or on a nearby campus, or on an excursion to New York, or on a rocket to Mars. I mean, this, that. He might. This is where you call things that aren't based on evidence. It's just whole bunches of guesses in the air. They were sighted eloping near Mount Gilead, but it turned out to be someone else. And now what you have in this case is God knows how many sightings. And so, today we see the same thing happening with our modern cases where somebody goes missing and everybody sees that person. Now they have pictures of the person that's supposed to be that person. And it usually turns out not to be that person because that person is Well, in many cases dead, so it can't be them. But people see them. And so this is 1950. People were still saying, I saw the guy. They saw the guy. And I want to point out one of the reasons people come up with so many sightings and so many stories is a thing called the media. No, here's a poster out looking for him that was put out missing, and then all these things came out in the newspapers. So even the media back then did love a salacious story. They like a mystery, and they put this out, and people read this, and then from this they gather information. They see what the guy looks like, and they can create sightings, and they can create stories about that person. So you got to be very careful of those kind of things. So there were some women he had written to that were not his fiancée. It's hard to say why he wrote to them. There didn't seem to be like he was trying to date them at the time, but he had some communications. He supposedly had other like dates, shall we say, with women throughout his army life when he was overseas. I'm not saying he cheated on his girlfriend. I don't know. But, you're in the military and you're someplace else, who knows what happens, right? So that was one of the theories. The next theory was this one. Some think that the mysterious George, this guy he disappeared off with, or had supposedly went out to dinner with and never came back from the dinner, was in love with Cox from army days and either kidnapped or killed him, or that Cox propositioned George and a fight ensued that had unfortunately fatal consequences for one or the other of them. So this was the gay connection that, and this plays out in a couple of different ways. It plays out in who he might have met that night, and also plays out in that he might want to disappear. Let me read you a little bit about that. Funny, this I've never heard this statement before. Okay. Another discordant note came when someone questioned Cox's sexual orientation. And mind you, this is interesting because his family says absolutely not. His friends said absolutely not. Everybody who was in the military said absolutely not. They did not believe he was gay. There's nothing wrong with him being gay, but everybody around him seemed to think he was not. All right. But a West Point, a staff psychologist, thought that he was a homosexualist. I don't think I've ever heard that term. Homosexualist. Okay. Maybe the 1950s had different terminology. And there were two weird letters that were sent to his roommate from Greenwich Village. One which hinted that Cox was being held as a love prisoner. It read like this. Could it be possible that your roommate, Richard C. Cox, is the victim of a crazy homosexualist who likes military boys with nice shapes? Okay, the guy did have nice shape. Okay, let me put out his other pictures. Good looking dude. All right. Yeah, okay. And being that a lot of you lads have nice shapes, they prey on these lads. There are three men who make Union Square Park on 14th Street their place of hangout, and they prey on young men from 20 to 24. I don't know why 20 to 24 is an important age range, but okay, for their sexual desires. I heard one of them remark that the lads from West Point have nice asses. Probably relatively true. The one who passed that remark, his name is George. You see the connection here. If an investigation were made, you'll have Richard C. Cox's lover, who lured him into homosexuality and is keeping him prisoner. All right. That's an interesting one. Then we had another one. Let's see. There was a New Year's party where he said that a bunch of them were, some guys danced together for a couple minutes because they were making fun because there weren't enough women. And it was just horseplay. But let's see what else. Yeah. Then let's go further about this issue, because there's more to this. A soldier in Detroit who had known Dick Cox in Germany said he'd last seen him in April of 1948. He said they had run into Cox quite by accident at Tony Pastor's nightclub in Greenwich Village. Cox at the time said he was stationed at Stewart Field, preparing to take the West Point entrance exams. Since Pastor's was a place known to be favored by homosexuals, each man was surprised to see each other. The soldier, in town for the night, told Cox he was staying at the Dixie Hotel. Later, he said Cox came to the hotel, knocked on the door of his room, and asked if he could stay. And during the night, he said they had sex. In another interview, a man who had been with Cox at Stewart Field and was now an admitted homosexual claimed that he and Cox had had sexual relations while they were at prep school. He also said that Cox, even after entering the academy, had been very closely associated with other homosexuals and with one man in particular. The witness's opinion was that Cox's disappearance was related to his homosexual activities. So, in other words, Cox, although known to have affairs with women, had also been attracted to men. If these witnesses' stories are true, this bisexuality, the agents realized, put a different spin on things and quite possibly had some direct relationship to Cox's disappearance. So, the FBI is involved in all of this, and they're studying what could have happened to him. Okay, so that is one theory. Let me read you the other reason some thought this might be so. Let me find it. It was a psychologist. This is a psychologist theory. He had read, I'm going to read you a couple of letters that the psychologist looked at. He said that, hold on a second. Oh, there. Sorry, I'm in the wrong place. Let me go to my other thing here. All right. So he did this profile, this psychological profile. He said he saw him as a troubled young man. And he said he wanted to win recognition, but he was concerned about his public image. He could be charming in social situations while remaining emotionally aloof, his fears and anxieties remaining unacknowledged. He wanted to be different from what he was. Although he was self-absorbed, at the same time, he was out of touch with himself. He was confused. He needed his privacy. His repressed instinctive needs and feelings were displaced. Let's see. There was a searching for self, for a sexual identity. There was an immature attachment to the mother figure, and he did write a lot of letters to his mother, so he was very close and called her Minnie as opposed to mother. He felt rejected by the male figure in his early life while his dad died, so he was mostly around women. His sexual urges were strong and lacking in imagination, warmth, and kindness. He likely had many sexual fantasies in which men and women played a part. He felt dominated by women, and although he allowed them into his life and even sought their friendship, feared them and their power over him, he was angry and confused. He felt like a martyr. He felt the fear of disapproval to his way of life, which he's saying might be bisexual or homosexual, was a constant factor in his behavior and personality. And this psychologist thinks he disappeared willingly because he couldn't handle being in the military any longer and having to repress his own self. So that was a theory number two, that either he met somebody and something went wrong with their liaison, or he decided to take off and live his life the way he wanted to live. Number three. Okay, number three. Yeah, okay, so here it says here, there are those who hold on to the theory that Richard Cox was gay and that he affected an escape from his too-straight life into a bohemian lifestyle somewhere under an assumed identity. All right, so then we have this. He was murdered by George for a different reason. George, this was not a gay thing. This guy came from, they had known each other in Germany, and some think that he was, let me find it here. Okay, oh yes, that he had observed or was participating in a murder in Germany, and about a trial he was supposed to testify in. And so this guy committed the murder, or that he committed the murder with, or knew about, and I'll get into that a little bit later, came to see him and killed him because he was a witness and didn't want him to talk. All right. So also they talk about black market activities, that, not only the cigarettes, but maybe other black market activities. And he made enemies, and therefore one of those enemies came and lured him out and killed him that night. Okay. Then we have the other three theories. We have this one, that because he spent his tour of duty near the post-war Germany, near the communist border, they thought that something happened due to his proximity to the border. What would that be? All right. The claim there is, wow, let me find the short version. Oh, yeah. He made powerful enemies on the Soviet side of the border. He was kidnapped, shipped to the USSR aboard a Polish freighter, and imprisoned at a gulag above the Arctic Circle. Or he was kidnapped, brainwashed, and turned into a double agent in the US to spy for the Russians. So this is the Russian connection, that he either was kidnapped by the Russians and gotten rid of by imprisonment, or they turned him into a double agent. Then we have this. These two here represent the spy story that, let's see, the CIA found him a valuable asset because he had been doing this intelligence stuff near the border. And he was also studying Russian at a West Point. And he was at the top of his class, leadership potential. So that they then lured him into, out to say, hey, join the CIA. We got covert stuff for you to do. You're going to be a spy. You're going to, here it is, smuggling Cold War scientists from behind the communist lines, keeping an eye on the Soviets, be an operative. Let's see, what else is he supposed to have done with that? And there was this whole Cuba thing that I'll get into, why he was a spy, and then he knew stuff about Cuba he shouldn't have known, and there was somebody in the CIA who knew. I'll get into all of that. But those are the theories, and I wanted you to know them so that when we proceed, you can help me decide whether any of those theories make any sense, because it's quite amusing in the fact that people don't a lot of times pay attention to evidence, and they don't pay attention to logic when they come up with theories. And any theory will do sometimes when you either just want excitement, or you want to give in a tip and get some attention, or whether you're writing a book. So any theory might do. And there's a problem with connecting dots that shouldn't be connected. Just because there are dots doesn't mean they have anything to do with one another or anything to do with the particular issue at hand. So be very careful about that. I'm going to check on some of your comments, and then I'll go to more depth. All right. That's an interesting point, Sarah. By the way, Sarah is Alex. I always have to say that in case people think I can't read. I was 19 once, and I had nothing to offer. I love it. Okay, that is a very good point. This was a very young man. We're not talking about a 30-year-old who'd been in the military for 10 years and had been working in some level of stuff that you would really think he might know stuff. I mean, pretty much when you join the Army in your first year of Army, you're pretty much a nobody, and you're trying to just toe the line and do your duties and get recognized as being a good officer in a good part of the military. You're a good Army dude, and then you can move up. He was only in the Army for 1 year. And he was 19. So exactly what great skills and wisdom and knowledge and secret information would he have? And that's something to keep in mind. Let's see. Let's see. Oh, I got to take off my glasses. They're blurred. I can't see anything now because they're fogging over. Let's see. Oh yeah, the old spy detective magazine illustrations are good. Yeah, I mean, I do believe I think they are real magazines. I just couldn't find any information. Oh, you like those? Well, I'll put the link in for the guy who provided those for me. So let's see what else thoughts. Okay, we're going to get into this issue. Doesn't sound like he would take off and never contact his mom. And when we look at personalities, we have to ask ourselves, what kind of people are they? Is this a person who is disconnected entirely from his family so that he would never want to let them know he was alive or whatever? And would he have a really good reason for doing that? And that's another issue. In other words, would his family disown him if they found out, for example, he was gay? Or would they disown him if he just left the military and said, look, it's not for me? Would they disown him? And if neither one of those is true, then would he need to disappear and never be seen again? And would he want them to think he was dead? Because, there's always ways to disappear. I always find this interesting when people, so there are people who disappear and they want to be considered dead because they don't ever want anybody to look for them. And they want to piss off the people they left behind. Usually there's something there, or they want the attention. But if you just want to disappear, you can simply leave a note that says, I'm done with this. I don't want to be here anymore. He could, by the way, just resign from West Point. It wasn't like he didn't have to get kicked out. He could just say, I resign, and walk away. He's a young man. He could go do a whole bunch of other things in life. His mother I think she was in insurance. She was fairly successful. He could go and get work through her, or he could get work elsewhere in the world. He didn't have to disappear. So that's one of the issues, is why would he just disappear and let everybody think he was dead and have this massive investigation? He could just simply resign and say, I'm off. Look, I just want to go do my thing. Doesn't even explain what his thing is. I just want to go do my thing. Write him a thing to his fiance and his mom saying, look, I just want to explore the world. And go explore the world. Go to Mount Kilimanjaro, or, whatever, go explore the world. Send a postcard. So if you want to fall off the face of the earth, there's usually a really good reason for it. Like, for example, if you're a man who's married to a woman you have 3 children, and you go out to get the cigarettes or the milk or whatever you go out to get and never return, it's because you don't want the responsibility of that family anymore. You don't want to be found. You just want to vanish, and then you want to start a new life, which is better than killing them all off, like some people do, and then try to start a new life. So, yeah, I didn't see it. That's a good point. Is there any reason why he would want to run away and not be able to do it in a way that didn't involve him just disappearing? Karen says, I agree that when you go missing, people will remember all the sorts of salacious things about you that you said. Oh my God. I would, if I get knocked off or just have a heart attack later today, I would love to just be that ghost that can lurk around for a while and oh, really? Seriously? Are you saying that about me? And I'll be so annoyed. I'm going, that is just not true. And it's amazing because I even hear that, and probably you've heard that. Have you ever had somebody just say something about you that just was not true to other people? And you're sitting there going, that is not true. And they just say it like they breeze it out, like it was something you would say or have said or have done. And you're like, no, that's not me. And people, because the person can say it very confidently, other people go, oh, okay. And you're like, no, not true. And it's very frustrating. So, and that's when you're still alive and can even fight back. But, when you're dead, you can't, people write these tell-all books, make me just sick sometimes. The tell-all book about how horrible their parents were or their mother or whatever. And that person cannot defend themselves. They cannot say that half of that crap is just not true. They can't tell their side of it. It's very sad. So yeah, a lot of stuff like that goes on once you can't speak up. Let's see. All right. Now, let me go to, I want to read a little bit about his back. It's just about right when he went to disappear. All right. Because this will tell us a lot. All right. Did I just move that piece of paper? Oh, I'm going to be so annoyed. All right. There we go. Hold on. So this is what happened when he disappeared. You won't get this just, let me get these backgrounds out of here and have something more peaceful about when he went to disappear. All right, here we go. Let's do this. All right. We're going back to, someone might, this is part of the theory that George might have been a guy who helped him disappear. And we'll get to that theory. Okay. All right. So right about the time that all this was going on, Cox made a suggestion to his roommate, Welch, that had the potential of getting them both into trouble. Cox's civilian suits sent out for cleaning after his return from Christmas were now back. And this is kind of important because he had sent out his civilian suits as opposed to always wearing the West Point stuff, his uniform, or his, the real fancy stuff. These were his just regular suits. And he did not when he disappeared, those suits did not go with him. So this is a kind of interesting thing. For if he disappeared voluntarily and wanted to vanish, leaving in your West Point outfit is probably less sensible than taking one of your suits and disappearing with it, where you could look normal, like a regular person. All right, but anyway, that's not that he couldn't have gotten somehow, just gone to a Salvation Army store and picked up some clothing and dumped his uniform and changed up. He could have done that. So there's two sides to that. All right. On Monday, before the inspection, civilian clothes would have to be placed in storage. While they were available, though, what about putting them on after taps and slipping out to Newburgh for a little extracurricular fun? Well, his roommate was tempted, but he was like, he tried on one of the suits and didn't fit him. So he's like, I don't have to go now. He said he didn't want to be considered a chicken, but he also didn't want to get caught, because you get extra demerits if you're caught doing something that is not permitted. All right. With that out of the way, Welch and Cox discussed their legal options. In other words, when you're at West Point, you have certain things you can and cannot do. So now they couldn't disappear off and have some fun. So they went to the field house, where they saw some boxing matches and a basketball game. So normal time. Around 5 o'clock, they neared the barracks. Cox told Welch, "You go ahead. I want to check my games in the Sally Port." So check his grades. So he was going to go check something out, and that was fine. A few minutes later, while he was doing this, Cadet John Samotis, a second classman in Cox's company, saw Cox near the Sally Port entrance talking to a neatly dressed civilian in his 20s, whom Samotis had never seen before. He said that Cox was doing most of the talking. The visitor stood just under 6 feet, a bit taller than Cox's 5'8". He had a clean-cut appearance, was wearing a coat and a tie under a light colored top coat. So he passed by and said, "Hey, Dick," and Cox said, "Hey," and they resumed talking to the civilian visitor. A few minutes later, Cox went to Company B2 orderly room and signed out on the departure log. On Saturdays, cadets were eligible for dining privileges. This is very important. Dining privileges. When invited by a visitor, they could skip the evening meal in the cadet mess hall and have dinner at Hotel Thayer on post. So there was one kind of fancier, nicer place on post you could go to and not go to the mess hall. You could sign out for that. He did that, and his entry read, his name, Cox, class 3, destination, DP Hotel, meaning dining privileges hotel. Timeout, 17:45. So he left and went with this person, which may be the George, okay? He left and went out. Now, when Cox returned to room 1943, now he was, his two roommates, Welch was there. His other roommate, Joe Urshale, was not there at the time. Cox told Welch that he had just talked to the same fellow who had been to see him the previous weekend. So this is the second time he'd seen this fellow. He then added that the man whom he referred to only as "my friend" had invited him to have dinner at the hotel. As Welch got ready to leave for supper formation, Cox began to change clothes. All right. And let's see what happened. Okay. So he changed clothes. I'm trying to figure out how this all worked. Okay, no, so this is before he signs out, by the way. It gets time. No, he signed out at 17:45, so now we're talking about 5:45. Not military time, 5:45. At 6:15, he put on his suit, the fancy clothes. Okay, put on the fancy clothes because that's what you would wear to go to the fancier restaurant, right? And not go to the mess. So he put on full dress. At 6:15, first call sounded for supper. 3 minutes later, Dick Cox, having put on his full dress coat in front of the mirror, was buttoning down his gray overcoat. Cox said, "See you. I should be back early around 9 or 9:30. So he was only planning to be away for a few hours. So after he signed out, evening goes on normally. But Cox never came back, never signed back in. he said, well, that's kind of concerning, because if you don't come back in, you're in trouble, right? But they did not find him there. So what happened to him? That was the night he vanished. All right. I think I might have, I'll have to go to the night before. Okay. So now they were like, what happened to this guy? So now they're talking to everybody, trying to figure out what happened to Cox. And they asked him who he was out with. And they said, well, he was invited out by a man he'd known in the army in Germany. The same man they said had visited Cox on the previous weekend. And they said they didn't know what his name was. Cox simply referred to him as his friend. But then they commented something very weird. He wasn't much of a friend. What does that mean? Well, Cox had said some remarks that were odd. Said seemed like he didn't really care for the guy, and even complained the man was taking up too much of his time. He said he was a braggart, a bad apple, who had even boasted about having murdered some woman in Germany. And now you have to question here. If he didn't like the guy, why is he spending so much time with him? That's rather interesting. So, let's see. Let me find the part where happened before that. So this guy, what had happened was this visitor, whose name is eventually named George. What was the story behind the day he disappeared? Okay, so this is where it gets a little complicated. All right. They said that his visitor came to West Point on the weekend of January 7th and 8th, and again on January 14th, on the day Cox disappeared. The man, they said, had annoyed Cox as he bragged about things in his past, not only brutal, but also criminal. Cox, in fact, had told them he was a little afraid of the man, and he was capable of almost anything. And one of the guys said, hey, it's pretty unusual for one man to visit another man on consecutive weekends, if they were only a casual acquaintance. And there was a lot, just very strange. And that's where he got the opinion that maybe Cox was gay, and that was what was going on. Now, the week before that he disappeared, on January 7th, this is what happened. At 4:45, the phone rang, and the guy answered the phone, and the guy on the phone said in a rough voice, hey, fella, do you have a Dick Cox in your company? And he's like, yeah, we do. Hold on while I go get him. And then he found out he wasn't in the room. Well, look, when he comes in, tell him to come down to the hotel. And that's where the dinner thing would be, right? The week before. Just tell him George called. He'll know who I am. We knew each other in Germany. So he wrote a brief note, put it in the mailbox. Cox, George called. He's at the hotel. Dick Cox came in at 5:15 and read the note and looked puzzled and said something to the effect he didn't remember anybody named George. However, he said he guessed he'd go down to the hotel and get something to eat. Then a civilian visitor came in, and they saw him. Let's see. Let me find where it comes here. The visit. Okay. So after Cox leaves, a visitor shows up and says, ask for Richard Cox. And he said his name is Richard Cox, and he's in B2. So Mareska, this other fellow, called B2 orderly room, got word to Cox. And by that time, he was back in his room, and he said, okay. So he left his room and again said it was some guy known in Germany. And he entered Grant Hall and asked if he could page the visitor. And the guy did that. And they shook hands and acted as if they were glad to see each other. And the civilian was 5'11", about 185, fair complexion, full face, short haircut, dressed very neatly. So, like the other person said on the night he actually disappeared. Cox and the visitor talked for about 5 to 10 minutes and returned to the clothing rack. And they got dressed again, and he said after get dressed, he got his full suit on again, and they went out. He signed out. All right. Here's the problem. Cox returned that evening around 8 p.m., still wearing his full dress coat and long overcoat. And let me try to figure out where it was. Okay, so it's a lot of information. Just let me find exactly where I want to point this out. Okay, Cox came back. He showered and was in his room by 7:15. All right. And he was writing a letter, and he fell asleep on the desk while he was writing his letter. And he seemed very disoriented, like had been drinking. And he got up and he rushed into the hallway and said, "Who's down there? Is that you, Alice?" And nobody understood what the heck his problem was. And they thought that was really weird, that he had drank so much he was in that condition. And he said later on that what had happened was that he had signed in early around supper time, then gone back to his friend. The man, according to Cox, had a bottle of whiskey in his car, and he insisted on Cox taking several drinks with him. In fact, he wouldn't allow Cox to leave until he did. He also made Dick promise to meet with him again on Sunday. That's the next week that he disappeared. And he was pissed off about that, but he called him my friend, or he never gave his name personally. And he said, again, he was a former Ranger who liked to brag about having killed Germans during the war and having gotten some German girl pregnant that he killed. So he didn't seem like a nice fellow. And that was the week before. And then the week later, he disappears with this guy. And one of the interesting things about the disappearance, the night he was drinking, was that when he signed in, he actually later on came back and changed the time 1 hour, which was a violation of the code there, because he didn't want them to know where he had been, and he didn't come back on time. So he changed. They looked at the handwriting and seen he had changed the number, which was a total violation. So what the heck was going on with this guy? So we have Cox, and this is a picture of him, by the way, of him, the drunk picture. So it's a very confusing issue as to, people give all these stories. And where is that picture? Yeah, here he is. That's him. They took a picture of him drunk at his desk. He was trying to write a letter then. So let me recap quickly. This guy Pierce, that he apparently claims he knows him from Germany. The guy claimed he knew him from Germany. And they get together a couple times. The first time he goes out, gets drunk with this guy, comes back, signs in, and apparently is late and signs in. And then he's freaked out because it would be obvious that he didn't come back in time. Changed that. And let me see if I can get the exact information on the changing. Here we go. When he returned that day, he took a shower and slept off the effects of alcohol. As a prank, his roommates photographed him as he slept while slumped over his desk. Later that evening, Cox altered the military time he had written in the departure books, changing 1923 to 1823 to look as if he'd attended the 6:30 cadet supper formation. In fact, he had skipped the formation. They found that later. He would have been charged with violating the cadet honor code if they had found it. Okay, so that was why would he do that? Why was he violating the honor code? Why was he out with this guy drinking in what appears to be this guy's car? We don't have him being seen at a restaurant, the restaurant he's supposed to be in, 2 times. He supposedly goes out with this guy weekend after weekend and is not actually seen at the restaurant he's supposed to be at. First time, he lies about it and comes back drunk, takes a shower and passes out. Second time, he just goes out and disappears. He left in his room, by the way, his gold watch, nice watch. He left in his room, I think it was like $60, which is supposedly like $900 today. So quite a bit of money on a check worth about $20 or $25 in the day, which again was worth something. And he left all his civilian clothes. So that's one of the reasons it's hard to believe he didn't disappear. The plan is disappear on purpose because he left those things, unless he wanted to pretend he wasn't going to disappear. But this whole evening is very, very weird. Now, he does say some things, just to be fair, about his issue with the military. He does seem to have some problems with it. He's writing to his mother and to his girlfriend that he's not happy at all at West Point. He writes this. That one of the last 2 letters he wrote to his girlfriend, Minnie. I'm sorry, that Minnie is his mother. To his girlfriend. Where's that his mom? Ew, okay, wait a minute. All right, Minnie, this is his mom. He wrote to her and said, "What would you think if I chucked West Point?" And he tried to explain it. Then he wrote to his girlfriend, Betty. Slowly I'm getting acclimated again. I don't know if this place is worth the work you have to go through to stay here. But since everybody except the cadet says it is, I guess I'll have to stick around. I don't know, think it's worth it. But it's too late now to make up for it. It's already been done. I think I've just talked myself into the idea I don't like military life. But being young, I'm probably wrong again. So I'll sit tight and study like a good little cadet for another 2.5 decades. Or is it years? Like little difference. And then he says again, in another letter, don't have any idea what there is to tell you about this place. But you're the best. Oh, he's telling his mother, you're the best thing that happened to me. Oh, the daughter, wait a minute. Oh, he's writing his mom, says about his future fiance, she's the best thing that ever happened to me. The first being that I'm your son. So, but he said there was another letter he wrote, which had a picture of him spitting on on West Point. And so he seemed very conflicted about staying at West Point. He did not really seem to like being there. Was it just grouching like, you do when you're stuck in school and you have to make it through? Or was he really, truly, truly unhappy? And the psychologist you see thought he was terribly unhappy and voluntarily left for whatever reasons. But we hear different stories from different people as to that. I'm going to check your comments, and then I'm going to tell you about the searches they did, what they found, and then I'm going to go into some of the theories and see which ones we should knock down. Okay, so this is an interesting point. Stephanie says, it seems like this George person was possibly blackmailing Richard or threatening to. This is an interesting point. The question will be about what? And one of the things I think is kind of weird is that let's talk about the murder thing. The whole murder thing. There is a story about the murder thing that maybe he saw the murder. Okay, let me find my little thing on that because it was quite interesting. The murder. See, I have a little things here. Okay, so this guy came along. This guy named Hill came along with the murder theory that. Let me go back to our really cool comic books. Which one's the murder theory? Yeah, the murder theory. All right. This guy came along and said this. Now, this is where you have to be very careful about what you read and what you hear and try to determine how much is true and how much isn't. He said that the guy named Hill, Cox, and an individual nicknamed George had been stationed together in Bamberg, Germany. He did not remember the man's real name, but he assumed it was the same mysterious George who had visited Cox. So anyway, they were all with the 13th Constabulary Squadron in Bamberg. And then when they went over to the 6th Constabulary Squadron, he had moved to Coburg. George, however, had remained in Bamberg, having transferred to the 16th Infantry Regiment. All right, so it goes on. Said that whenever Cox had a couple of days off, Hill said he would go to Bamberg to visit George. During this period, while Cox was in Coburg and George was in Bamberg, the body of a German woman was found in a freight car in Bamberg. She had been strangled with a belt. The Polizei, the German civil police, identified George as a suspect after witnesses placed him with the girl about the time of the murder in the vicinity of the rail yard. Soon it was rumored throughout the Coburg area that George had been the killer, and Hill believed it was Cox who had spread these rumors because the stories began well before the German police had named George as a suspect. Later in 1948, the German police had turned the case over to the military for prosecution of George, but George was never court-martialed. Instead, he was transferred to Coburg and put on orders to be shipped home. During the last months Cox was in Coburg, according to Hill, he lived with a German girl named Alice in her apartment. Hill said they often observed George going into Alice's apartment to meet with Cox. And Hill goes on. 3 days before George left Coburg, they found that George had used a belt to strangle a new recruit in the hallway in the barracks. Hill and Zorn had to pull George off and roughed him up a bit. While George was in Coburg, he had bragged about having something to do with the death of a German Fraulein and given a vivid account of the events. He never heard George actually admit to the killing and had only heard him say that nobody would ever prove he killed the girl because the German criminal police could not prosecute him. Later, Hill said when Cox turned up missing and stories circulated about his having testified at the court-martial, or at a court-martial, the military searched their records but found no evidence of any such testimony. Investigators, unfortunately, did not check the records of the German police. Therefore, they never learned the real identity of George. In Hill's opinion, Cox had participated in the murder of the German girl, or at least had been a witness to it. The involvement had been a factor in his leaving the military academy in the company of George. Well, this seems like it could make sense because obviously Cox had said this character, who was supposedly George, he actually stated to his friends that he killed some woman. And he was a kind of a nasty little character. All right. So anyway, what's interesting about this is that, let's see, going on further, Hill has some more information. All right. What is the information here? Okay. He also says that while he and Cox were in Coburg, their duties brought them into almost daily contact with U.S. and Soviet intelligence agents. Coburg, he said, was a hot spot for spying, and the town was crawling with both U.S. and Russian agents. Cox, as a member of an intelligence unit, would have been in the position to have frequent contact with these agents. On one occasion, according to Hill, Cox had shot and killed a Soviet agent in the border incident at a checkpoint. Now, you remember the other one, the thing about the Russians kidnapping him? All right. He and Cox, as part of their, he shot this Soviet agent. One night, he said he and Cox accompanied American OSS, Office of Strategic Services, agents to the borders where they're supposed to meet with certain Russians. During the meeting, said Hill, an American interpreter, began arguing with one of the Russians, and one side opened fire. At that point, he and Cox began firing, with Cox killing one of the Russians. Underwood reported that Hill had told him, this is the guy who was doing the investigating, he gave no indication whether he believed him or not. Okay, so that was what happened. But then they went to Groner, which is Cox's best friend, right? He said Hill didn't know what he was talking about. He said Cox never lived off base with any woman named Alice because he never lived off base. So how was he going to live with a woman named Alice if he never lived off base? What's more, Cox never even was in Bamberg. Hill talked about Cox being stationed in Bamberg, and Cox was never in Bamberg. Then what about the stories of Cox shooting a Russian border guard and being involved in the killing of a German girl? He says, well, that guy's got a vivid imagination. He said when Cox and he were together, he'd never even heard of this guy. And he asked about the story about the murder, and he said this. There was just nothing on any murder. There was no court martial. None of this stuff appears to have been actually anything that happened. Were there elements of truth, this guy asked, or is it embellished of what this guy read in newspapers and thought it was a cool thing to say? You see how now in that Hill guy came up with two things. One, that George came there because Cox had been involved in a murder or had seen him murder, had testified against him, something. And he came there to get him back and kidnap him and murder him. And you would wonder why, if this was the kind of guy he was, and why would he even meet with this guy? That seems a little odd to me. What would be the blackmail? You're talking about blackmail. What would be the blackmail that would get Richard Cox to meet with George alone? Not in the restaurant, but alone. Why would he do that? What would be the point? So that was one story about the murder thing. And yet, Cox did mention something like that. So I don't know if there was some story rolling around and he just, maybe this guy bragged. Maybe there was a guy who bragged about killing somebody and he just never, it's like, maybe he did that. I don't know. And then this whole thing about he shot at Russians, which leads to the Russian story about how he was kidnapped by the Russians. I'll stop for just a second and check out your thoughts, and then I'll go on to, well, George may be full of it, and that's possible. And the secretive thing is questionable. Is what was he secretive about is the issue. The question here is whether this was already information that had already been out in the news. And once this is the biggest problem with so many cases. Once you spread that information in the news, people pick up little pieces of it and they can create stories out of it. and it makes, it doesn't necessarily make any sense. Or well, let me put it this way: it does make sense, and that's why people believe it. So this became a big possibility. Now the whole Russian thing. let me say the Russian thing. Okay, so now Groner, his best friend, says there's this guy. He thought George was a guy named David Westervelt. He had been Cox's immediate supervisor in Coburg. Okay, he had also suggested Westervelt was a recruiter for the Central Intelligence Agency. All right, so now we have this whole story. So now we get a fellow named Sturgis, who is Sturgis? Let me find who Sturgis is. There's so many names. Oh, he's an ex-CIA man. Okay, so the writer of this book is not the guy doing the investigation. There's a different guy doing that, and he asked the author to write the book because he wasn't a writer. He was the guy who's doing the investigating. Jacobs was obsessed with this case once he heard about it because he lived in the area, and he spent like 10 years investigating it. So he's one of these people who wanted to solve the mystery. All right, so he met with this guy named Sturgis. And he said that, where's the Russian stuff? Because Westervelt, this supervisor, was married to a Russian girl he met at a displaced persons camp. So Sturgis says, from what you're telling me, this is ex-CIA guy, it seems like this George is really Westervelt, his previous, the guy who was a supervisor in Germany, set up this kid Cox so the communists could go ahead and grab him. Maybe when they were drinking, he told more than he wanted. Either Cox knew something he didn't want him to reveal, or the guy was working for Russian intelligence, and he set the kid up. And there turned out there was this American prisoner in a Vorkuta camp in USSR whose name was Cox. Turned out it wasn't the same Cox. It was a different Cox. But so there was this writer. This is how convoluted it is. I just want to start knocking down some of these theories. This freelance writer, got to watch out for freelance writers, because we see this happen all the time. Now we have freelance YouTubers, and they aren't detectives or criminal profiles, although these ex-CIA guys seem like a bunch of interesting characters as well. Maybe they're just bored when they come up with these stories. But this freelance writer said this: he believed Cox had been abducted from West Point, taken to New York, and put on aboard a Polish ship, the Battery, which was then called a spy ship because it brought Russian diplomats and agents back and forth between Europe and the US. Anyway, Cox disappeared on a Saturday, and the Battery sailed into New York Harbor the following Tuesday and left on the 17th, and left 3 days later on the 20th. So the Russians kidnapped him. Why? Okay, see, here's where it's just stupid. So do I think this makes any sense that he supposedly, let's look at the murder thing first, George, the murder thing. This guy comes over and says, you know stuff about me that's not good. Well, he already bragged about, if this is anything true, he wasn't court-martialed. The German police didn't have anything on him. What would he care that this kid, now mind you, time has passed. It's been like a year and a half now since he's been in Germany. The kid hasn't talked to anybody. There's no prosecution going on. There's nobody following this supposed George around for murder. So he's going to now go and find this guy and kill him? Makes zero sense. Or now, let's say, now let's go to the supervisor thing. Let's see. The romantic secrets. He disappeared because he just didn't want to get married and didn't want to stay with West Point anymore. And so he just wanted to leave. No, he could go home. His mother was okay about it. His fiance was okay about it. Okay, maybe he didn't want the fiance. He wanted somebody else. Just nonsense. The Adventures with Men is a little bit interesting. We'll get back to that. To me, something happened a year and a half ago in Germany that wasn't being pursued. Makes no sense to me that somebody's going to show up and kill him. So the Russian thing. Okay, let's go to the Russian thing, and then we'll go to the CIA thing. The Russian thing is just stupid. Again, what? Because he shot a Russian agent across the border. So a year and a half later, you go find the guy at West Point and kidnap and kill him, or kidnap him. No, not even kill him. Kidnap him and put him on a ship and take him to Russia and put him. Do you think they care that much? I mean, it's not like it was. If he was actually involved in shooting anybody, which there's no evidence of, it's not like he shot some big, huge person in Russia and they had to go get him for that reason. He's just some grunt who was on the border and was doing what he was supposed to do, and they would not even care who he was. Be meaningless, absolutely meaningless. So this whole Russian thing is so ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. So then we'll go to the spy story. And we'll see if there's any validity here, because now basically it makes no sense he just ran away. Now there's a guy, mind you, who said he saw him. Let me tell you about that before I go to the spy story. All right. There's a guy who claims he saw him on the Greyhound station in Washington, D.C. because a lot of people were seeing him, but this guy actually knew him. His name was Shotwell, Ernest Shotwell. In 1951, he contacted an FBI agent in Danville, Virginia, in response to a newspaper article requesting information about Richard Cox. He said he had known Cox in 1948. So in 1951, the article said he had disappeared. He'd been gone for a year. Nobody knew what happened to him. There's a huge FBI investigation. They couldn't find him. But what he stated was this, that in 1952, a year after he'd already talked to the FBI, he was in a Greyhound station in Washington, D.C., and he saw Cox there. He said, during this time, I knew Cox fairly well, not as a close friend. He appeared to be a good soldier and had a neat appearance. At no time did he appear to be homosexual and made no advance to me or anyone that I can recollect. This is his statement. Okay, so he saw him in the Greyhound station. I went over to speak to him and called him by name. He appeared startled and not overly joyful at seeing a friend. At that time, he said, I resigned from the academy last year, and I'm going to work in Germany. When I talked to him, he appeared to be in a hurry and left the restaurant through the street entrance. His personal appearance was not in keeping with a West Point cadet. His clothes light for the weather. I have not seen him since 1952, nor do I know his whereabouts. And supposedly he passed a polygraph that he had seen him. But here's the problem. If he knew that the FBI was searching for him, he didn't report the meeting. As soon as he saw him, he never reported it. He already knew he was missing. It took him 2.5 years more to come forward. And why did he come forward 2.5 years later? I don't know. But if he already knew that this was a big issue, why wouldn't he have just immediately contacted the FBI and say, I just saw him? Because everybody was searching for him. So I don't believe this guy's story is another one of these people, I think, for whatever reason, decided he'd insert himself and say he saw this guy alive. But he's not the only one. Because this is where the CIA stuff comes in. All right, the CIA spy stuff. Okay. All right. Whew. Now, the claim here is that Westervelt guy, his supervisor, was really working for the CIA. All right. And he may or may not have used the name George and came to the academy to see him and take him to dinner. All right. This is a theory of the guy that the book is written about, essentially. The man who studied this for 10 years, and he asked this guy to write the book for him. So this, after all his investigating, and he went out and he investigated Jacobs. He investigated, talked to all the people. So that's why the book is quite interesting, because he got a lot of information. But now after all these different pieces of information, he has decided he's not homosexual. He didn't run off voluntarily just to get away from the military. He didn't believe in the Russian thing. But now he's going to the CIA spy thing. And he says that he thinks this is what happened. Cox Westervelt and Grant Hall recognizes him. And then they go out and then he has drinks. And Westervelt is good at intimidating because he was his boss and he's an intimidating fellow. And so he talks to him that one night and it's weighing on his mind. And then He thinks that during that time that he was drinking, he probably unloaded, telling about his lack of desire for a military career, his hatred of cadet life, and perhaps even his sexual hangups. Westervelt, because of his intelligence background, has already been approached by the CIA. Now, is there proof that Westervelt had anything to do with the CIA? No. But now he's claiming this is where theories you start fabricating, and this is what this fellow Jacobs is doing, because he's so fascinated with this case, and he's trying to come to a conclusion. So this is in the last chapter of the book. So after all this, now he's got this information and he's putting it all together. He's connecting dots that may not be even dots. All right. So he says because Westervelt has already been approached by the CIA, and over the next a few days, he thinks about Cox and that connection. True to form, he's eager to play the big shot. He returns to West Point the following Saturday with a solution to Cox's problems. And so he says, okay, tell him we'll be back early. But and at that point, he says that Cox intended to return, which is why he didn't take civilian clothes, why he left his money and his gold watch. But when Westervelt suggests going off post for a few drinks, Cox agrees. The idea might even have been Cox's, who knows? But anyway, Cox has been feeling tremendous pressures. His distaste for military career has been steadily increasing. He fears the reaction of his strong-willed mother were he to resign. I don't think so. Everyone expects him to marry his girlfriend, Betty. Yeah, so, okay. And she even plans on coming to New York to be near him. Meanwhile, he continues to struggle with his own sexual orientation. So what Jacobs, let me give you the full name of the guy here. His name is Marshall Jacobs. He's a retired history teacher. And he's the one, through the Freedom of Information Act, got lots of information, and this book was written. All right. He doesn't think that he left to have an affair with some guy. What he says is that, or he left because he was just simply left. He says that maybe because he was struggling with some kind of sexual issues, that this was one more reason for him to leave. At this point, so he's talking to his ex-boss, and he gets intoxicated. He tells his visitor that passing up dinner at the hotel in favor of off-post drinking, he's committed a second honor violation. What can he do? He's too proud to accept the consequences, possibly including dismissal and going home in disgrace. Suddenly, as if by magic, he's given an opportunity to solve his problems. Perhaps, his visitor says. Well, when you start saying perhaps his visitor says, you're just fictionalizing stuff. Come home with me. I know where you can get a job easily. They're recruiting heavily for the new intelligence agency. Cox drunkenly nods consent, and they drive south to New Jersey. And of course, by the way, Westervelt has a very solid alibi for not being anywhere near New York at the time. He was at a basketball game and at his family's house, and the Westervelt was never there. But that doesn't matter. He's found a way to push some dots a little farther apart so Westervelt can sneak in, right? So anyway, then he's like, okay. He's got him out. Is this the answer? Now, I'll stop. Well, let me interject here. Do you think it makes any sense? The CIA is looking for spies. Okay, they're looking for people to go do covert stuff. They might pick a person who's left the army or who, whatever. Supposedly they have people in some of the colleges and stuff who might be working for the CIA looking for the kind of person that would be good. And then they would approach them and offer them this job. Do you think, I want to ask you this question, do you think that what they would want to do is pick this guy who's got issues and pluck him out? Pluck him out. Not have him leave on his own, or make it look like he'd gone to New York City on his little recreational leave, and he is out drinking with people, and he's staying overnight in a hotel there, and then he decides, I'm done. He just goes AWOL. Instead of having him just go AWOL on a trip, no, they pluck him out and start a massive murder investigation or a missing investigation, a massive one. They dredged lakes and they dredged rivers and they looked everywhere. They had a huge FBI thing looking for him. I'm pretty sure the CIA could just nudge the FBI and go, stop looking. So what do you think? Do you think it makes sense that the CIA would recruit this guy under the circumstances. Does that make any sense to you? Let's see. Stephanie says, unless they wanted him for some nefariousness, Hollywood movie reason, I just can't fathom. It's pretty Hollywoodish, is it not? Yes. They needed a Ken. He was not significant in any way. Yeah, there's nothing so special about him that they would do that. Stephanie says the CIA would unlikely recruit someone with so many rumors of his sexuality. The claim here is that they're doing that because he'll go covert, because he can't function if he's homosexual publicly. So this way he can want to be a covert spy, you see. Yeah. Okay. That's the theory there. I'm with you there. I'm going back up some here. Clarissa says, why does everything have to be so sensational? Sometimes a simple answer is just simple. Yes, and we're going to go back to Occam's razor on this one in a bit. But okay, so before I finish, go back, because I want to take care of the CIA thing. The author, not the author of the book, but the guy doing the studying, the retired history teacher named Marshall Jacobs, who's done a tremendous amount of work on this, by the way. Tremendous amount of work. He's talked to the FBI. He's talked to all the key players. There was a guy down in the California Keys, some snitch, who claimed that he saw him down there, and they had a conversation, and he said he was Richard Cox and all of that. Now, because of that, he keeps trying to find out more information. He is able to meet up with a guy he calls Robinson. Robinson is a CIA man who's now retired. And it says here, when we look at Robinson is not his real name. And to this day, Jacobs honors his promise not to give up the guy's real name. Keep this in mind. I'm going to read you what Robinson told him. This is the retired CIA guy. He said, I found your man. Robinson said he had a certain amount of information, but it was fragmentary. He would tell what he could, but Jacob was not to ask the source or inquire about Robinson's reasons for telling him these things. Jacobs nodded. He still felt a bit numb. And he said, look, following World War II, we were having great many problems with the Russians. Special training schools were established for undercover or covert actions, and there was a great deal of maneuvering people around. Cox, he said, for many years lived and worked in Europe, mostly in Germany, in the intelligence field. He did not name Cox's employer. So supposedly, and if you believe the guy on the Greyhound station, Cox said he was going to go to Germany to work. So now this is the guy saying he went to Germany working for some organization, some intelligence field. Besides being in Germany, he may have served as a contact point at a central location in France. One of Cox's tasks was getting people out from behind the Iron Curtain. These were members of the scientific community. Some were Russians and some were individuals who have been taken captive by Russians. Cox, I think, has seen a lot and has probably been scared a lot, but he still maintained a West Point sense of duty. His work has been secret and significant. It appears the people he helped were important to the Russians' nuclear capability, and getting them out caused these operations to shut down for a time. However, where these persons are now, or who they are, I have no idea. As for Cox's role, Robinson thought it might have been something illegal, which would explain why it was necessary to get him out of Europe. In any case, he said, about his activities being hushed up, it looked like one government agency was hiding him from another agency. It's an immensely complicated situation. And at this particular point in time, his only problem is what he knows. And the more you dive into it, the more you know what he knows, and the more it puts you in a particular situation. Ooh, if you keep nosing around, dude, you're going to end up dead. But Cox came back to this country, you say. Yes, he's been living out west in the mountainous panhandle region of northern Idaho, not far from the little town of Kellogg. Right now, though, you'll find him at NIH, the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. He was put into a federal facility rather than a regular hospital. Why? Because he has cancer and it's terminal. He has thoracic cancer. So he's on his deathbed. And he said, so Jacob said he understood. Cox at this late date and on what might be his deathbed would see no reason to break the silence merely to satisfy someone's curiosity. So he's not going to be able to go there and talk to him, you see. And before they parted, Robinson reminded Jacobs of his promise to maintain his anonymity. Okay. So the end of the last words of the story go this. Jacobs decided he had learned all he was going to, and he accepted the fact that neither he nor anyone else would ever know the full story. It was gratifying, nevertheless, to know that Cox was living an honorable, patriotic life in the service of his country. Richard Calvin Cox was a complex, talented individual, and Jacobs would have liked to have met him and to have a long talk. This was not to be. All the same, the research project, which along the way had been turned into an obsession, could justly be called a success. Marshall Jacobs had found Dick Cox and brought him back from Oblivion. The files could be closed. BS. if you believe that story, he's got a CIA guy who can't say who he is because of why? Oh, because it's so covert. And if he says what he is, he's going to let all these cats out of the bags and get out of here. I'm sorry, get out of here. What I see happening, I believe, and I don't know if Marshall Jacobs is still alive to say it's absolutely true, but I question you, Marshall Jacobs. You didn't just make up this ending because you've gotten to this point where you had no ending and you liked the spy one the best. And so you found a way to sum it up. And I'd be curious of where the thoughts and ideas came from to create what I consider a story. I don't believe for a minute any of it is true. And now I will go to what I think happened. But first, I'll get your comments before I can do that. Well, that may be true. Fantasy influenced by Fleming and James Bond. Who taught that person? Oh, who taught that person? No, not Pat. Who taught? Wait a minute. Hold on. So he's dying in a hospital and can't even reveal he didn't disappear before he goes. Yeah, that's a good point. Very good point. I mean, here's the one chance for him to tell his family, I still loved you. I became a spy and I did this for my country. This is his opportunity to speak up. No, you're not going to do that. No. Who taught that person to profile? Nobody. And this is what I see a lot of times on YouTube as well. It's like, I don't mind when you tell the story or do the research, but I mind when you decide to connect dots that shouldn't be connected. Alex, Sarah says, not Pat. Okay. This is your favorite part. Yeah, it takes a while to get here, but I had to go through all the rest of it first. Okay, wait a minute. You say, engineer says, this was a closeted man who got mixed up with a killer, not complicated. Let me see if I agree with engineer. Pat, I don't know that I read any of those, no. I don't know where they were, but okay. Let's go back and look at what the circumstances were of his disappearance. All right. First of all, he was dissatisfied a lot with being in the Army and at West Point. He had issues with this. He did. Why he had issues is the question. Did he just not like the life? Did he feel trapped in the lifestyle? Did people expect certain things of him, like perhaps his sexuality should be toward females, and it wasn't quite. A lot of people have been closeted, especially back in the 50s in the military. There are enough stories that make one wonder whether he truly was not bisexual or gay. And I would say more likely gay, but he did have lady friends, and how much he slept with the lady friends and how well it went, I don't know. But first of all, the Russian thing is ridiculous. The CIA thing makes no sense. They're not going to recruit a guy out of West Point and turn it into a huge missing and murder investigation. They're not going to do that. So the CIA did not recruit him. He was not kidnapped by the Russians. And he was not as you point out, he wasn't anybody really. He was for a year. He was just a basic grunt in Germany for a year. He wasn't anybody special. Then he finally went to the West Point, where he might become somebody special. But he was just at that point just a student, essentially a student. And he spent a year in the army. It's not a big deal. And so that he was involved in anything over there that would transfer back to the United States to me is ridiculous. And he'd been back too long, a year and a half. If somebody's going to do him in, they would have followed him straight back and taken care of it, or taken care of it there. So I don't believe anything had to do with Germany either, as far as any kind of black market stuff or murders or any of that kind of nonsense. So if we take away all of that, and we also can take away that he didn't appear to be planning to leave. He left his clothes there, his money there, his watch there. He was just going out for freaking something. Now, he didn't end up at the restaurant. If he was meeting an old friend, why not go to the restaurant? I mean, that's your opportunity not to eat mess food and to go to something a little bit nicer, you know. Why don't you just go to the restaurant? Where was he on those two excursions outside? That he, one, got drunk on one of them at least, and ended up forging the time, which is a breaking of the honor code. He's willing to do that over what happened. What did happen? He goes off with a guy. It's January, mind you, in New York. It's not a warm time. They're not taking walks, probably. They're not camping. Where are you? You're not in the restaurant. You could have gone some other restaurant, I suppose, off the base. You could have just gone to a diner. And you're drinking whiskey? As he said, the guy gave me whiskey or whatever, probably out of a bottle. That means you're not someplace where you're ordering drinks. So he meets a guy and he's spending time in the guy's car getting drunk, something he's not good at. Comes right back and takes a shower. Meets him again. Seems conflicted over meeting him, but meets him again. Doesn't come back. I'm going to say he's dead. The reason he didn't come back is because he was murdered by that guy, whoever the heck that guy is. And that guy is not seeming to be very well known to anybody. Whether he was actually in Germany with him or not, we don't even know. He may have said, just tell them you're my friend from Germany, so they'll call me and I can come down. Maybe that's just what they used as a kind of a message. I'm that guy from Germany. We don't know who that guy is. But he was in the area for 2 weeks, which indicates to me he might well live in the area. Now, there's one more thing, which I don't know there's any validity to, but I want to point it out. It's called this thing about the cap. They didn't find his body anyplace in any of the rivers. They dredged the living heck out of rivers, lakes, and everything. Hudson was a little bit tougher, so maybe he could be at the bottom of the Hudson. But mid-March, the snow was beginning to melt in the mountains north of West Point. On March 20th, near the town of Mountainville, they found a grayish-blue object half hidden in the snow. It turned out to be a cap with a chin strap, small brass buttons, and a shield with an insignia that said Cadet USMA. All right. The chief gave the cap to the FBI, saying he thought this was a type of hat that Cap had worn the day he disappeared. And they did try to get hair samples from and could not because it had been there too long. They did find the cap size was the same cap size that he would have worn. They said that, let's see, what did they say? They called Mrs. Cox to see if she knew what hats belonged to Dick. She said there were 2 uniform caps from his time as an enlisted man. But whether that was his cap or that even wore it that night, I do not know. Now, let me just show you where this location is. Just because it's the only thing they found that even vaguely. So it's 18 minutes. This is West Point here. 18 minutes away is where the cap is found, to the north. Now, do I absolutely believe that's his cap? Not necessarily. But I do believe that whoever this was there long enough not to be in town for the weekend. He was in town more than one weekend. He could have been from New York City. He could have been from Connecticut. He could have been from upstate New York. He could have lived somewhere in that general area. But he went out to meet a guy he was slightly conflicted over for some reason, intending to return. He was willing to risk his military career by getting drunk with this guy, coming in late and then fudging the stuff in the book. And he was then willing to go out with him again. And again, they didn't go to the restaurant. What the hell were the two of them doing if they weren't going to the restaurant? And my guess is, most likely, it's about sex. And I can't get past that simply because I can't see any good reason why he's sitting in some guy's vehicle, drinking whiskey with him and risking his career, unless those urges were he just were strong enough. Maybe the stories about him were true, that he had been with other men before, and that was one of the frustrations he suffered being in the military. And in West Point, he was like feeling stifled. And he was still very young, mind you. He was very, very young and finding out about himself. So I believe, yes, I believe he met that man for sex. I think that's the most logical, simple Occam's razor thing. And the second time around, something went wrong. And that guy killed him for whatever reasons. And I don't know why. It could have been something fueled by alcohol. It could have been some very bad sex play. It could have made the guy angry. The guy could have been just a 100% psychopath. It could have been simply a serial killer. And I did look up trying to find out whether any George serial killers running around that part of New York in 1950s, or again, George probably isn't even his name. It was probably just the message. Say George, you're from the military. So yeah, he could simply be a serial killer, and he just didn't know it. He was just meeting this guy, having a good time, and didn't turn out well because the guy killed him. And that makes more sense than somebody kidnapping him and luring him into the CIA. And I also believe because of the car, the car gives the killer an opportunity to move him out of the area. So if when they do all the searches, they're searching where he's at. But this guy could have driven up to where that cap was. Maybe he lived in that area. Could have buried him on his family farm. He could have put him, God knows where, in some other lake, but so far away where there's so many lakes that they wouldn't have dredged those lakes. He's never been found. And I don't believe I believe he's not alive. He's got to be dead somewhere. And somebody, I believe, did have a vehicle and took him out of the area. And I think it was a serial killer. And once you have somebody kill somebody like that, then I call them a serial killer. Is there proof that he's killed other men before? No, I don't have that proof. I don't know who he is. But if he's lured out for sex and he kills him, I'm going to say likely a serial killer. Could it just be they got in an argument? Yeah, that's possible too. But yeah, we'll never, ever know. But what I can say is all of these theories are so outrageous, so ridiculous. This guy was just a guy. He was just a very young man with a very normal career in the military, and good looking, though, very good looking guy in good shape. But, nobody's coming to kidnap him. And the CIA is not going to start a massive investigation just to get this guy who's just a guy. There's so many other people you can get, to think that, oh, he's so special. No, there was nothing particularly special about him other than that he was one of the many, many cadets. One of the many cadets who was doing okay. Why would you kidnap him? Why would you lure him? All nonsense. But the most likely way he was lured was through sex. And that's what I believe. So let me get your comments on that. Let's see what Barlow says. We most likely couldn't go through with the sex without being drunk. Yet I think this is an interesting thing. And it's not that he didn't want the sex necessarily, but just that it's a liquid courage thing. Just that it's easier. It's what a lot of people use alcohol. It doesn't matter who you're having sex with. Let's say you're going out with your boyfriend, or you're a girl going out with your boyfriend. You kind of want to have sex with them, but you're just a little shy. So you'd have a couple glasses of wine, and then you're not so shy. That kind of thing. And he's going out with this guy, and if this is something that he's still experimenting with, yeah, he might want to have that alcohol to take that edge off. Most likely couldn't go through with the sex without being drunk, then felt guilty when sober. Later meets may have been blackmailed after the initial meet, but then he didn't take money with him. I don't think he was ever being blackmailed. There was actually a theory that he was the one that killed George, and then he got rid of George, and then he ran away. But no, I don't believe that. No, I don't think he was being blackmailed. I think it was another opportunity for sex. Yes, he was dressed in his fancy military clothes. He had to have that clothing on in order to go to that restaurant, in order to get permission to go to the restaurant. And he had to have a reason for leaving. And if he didn't dress that way, he could not leave and have the excuse of going to the restaurant. Yeah. So that's true. Here's the thing about serial killers. Serial killers like power and control. And they may choose to have power control in a way that also makes them feel good. So heterosexual males may tend to choose women. Homosexual males may choose men. I mean, that's just sort of natural. So you get some fun on the way to actually killing them, doing stuff that you like doing. Now, there's some who, again, don't seem to care what sex they prey on, but yeah, there's that, yeah. I'm trying to go back here a sec because you got some really good comments. Let me scoop this thing back up, so I can get you. Well, that's interesting. Tim says the CIA mainly recruited at Yale, unless Westerveld just happened to be at West Point and something perked up his ears. There's no way there would be a recruitment connection. Yeah, I agree with that. It makes no sense. And again, you wouldn't start a huge investigation. I'm always amazed when people say, "Oh, well, I think that's what happened in this case." And I'm like, but that's, you do it. You don't, again, he's not that special. Just find a guy who's not going to start a big investigation. It makes no sense. Okay, that's interesting. Gay for pay, inviting danger. Now, of course, I will say this too. We actually don't know who, if there was a prostitution angle in this, one of them could have been paying the other. And just because there was money left in Cox's room doesn't mean that he seemed to have a lot of money for some reason. I don't know why. It's like supposedly near like $900 in his room. And I don't know why you'd have $900 in your room, with roommates around. I don't know how well protected it was. Why do you have so much money in there? I don't know. Maybe there's a logical reason for it. So theoretically, somebody could be paying him and he could be getting money that way, or he could be paying somebody because he has a lot of money. He's paying somebody else, or maybe it's just for fun, and there's no payment involved at all. The rabbit hole here. This was an entire underground rabbit network. So illogical. So but you see, that's what everybody's fascinated by, because the CIA thing is what people want to believe. Although I will say this, if you actually look up the reviews on Amazon, most people didn't buy the ending, which I thought was surprising. Actually, I was like, oh, I'm kind of shocked that you didn't go for it. So I thought that was so there's some logical people out there. And this is very possible. He went out for fun, ended up not so fun. Remember what was that one, Mr. Right? What was that? Mr. Goodbar. Remember the Mr. Goodbar movie? You just went out for a night of fun, chance of getting murdered. And that's happened to many a person, both male and female, especially with the bar scene. There's a lot of serial killers who have used bar scenes, especially gay serial killers, because people are going there looking for sex, So they meet a young man and they're like, hey, and they go with the guy and then they end up dead. And sometimes very brutalized before they die, because the guy's got a real sick bent and really enjoys the torture aspect of it. And who knows, there may have been the second time around, maybe this guy started torturing him and just say, who knows? We'll never know because we don't have his body. It would be nice to have found his body. It's a pretty big river, and the guy in the book does look into how easy it would be to put the body in Hudson. I'm not sure. It's very complicated. Well, again, what's frustrating me? Where's the heck is his body? Well, where the heck are a lot of people's bodies? So if you look back in history about people who've gone missing, you'll find a whole lot of bodies haven't been found. And sometimes they are found, but they're found 50, 100 years later. And we always say that, oh, well, if he were actually murdered, we'd find his body. Really? We have a lot of proof that that's not true in so many cases. So we have to accept that. Sometimes they just hide them really good. Let's see. Well, that's a good point. Men will hook up anywhere in my experience. Well, there is that. There is a thing about, like, we have in our area a place called Greenbelt Park, and you'll see men who are coming there for lunch and sitting in their cars for quite a while, and then you'll see another car pull up with some other guy who's having lunch, and then the two of them will get out of their cars. One will get out first, and the other one will get out later, and they'll all go down to the public restroom, and then they'll come back. Yeah. Sometimes, and there's a lot of bathhouses and things like that. So men in general, male or homosexual, heterosexual, whatever, gay or straight, they pretty much will have sex anyway. Yeah. So yeah, there is that. Oh, that's interesting. This was just a year after the sensational Alger Hiss Whitaker Chambers cloak and dagger story. Oh, that's interesting. Might have fed the frenzy. It was even included a guy alias George. I did not know that. That's interesting. And a lot of times that's true, when, especially for the media, once they got already something going, and then, oh my God, they're down at the newspaper, because those are newspaper days, right? They're down at the newspaper going, yes, we got a story here, and then they're going to blow that out as much as they can. And so, yeah, unfortunately, the media, even back in 1950s, wasn't so honorable either. So, let's see. Oh, wait a minute. Come on. You live in the area, you don't know. Everybody knows Greenbelt Park. That's why my son was like, he's like, I was hungry, and he was working, and he's trying to take his lunch stuff. So he said, I pull into Greenbelt Park to have lunch, and he's like, uh-oh, I got to get out of here. If somebody sees me here having lunch, they're not going to think I'm here for a sandwich. Oh my God, men in parks. And it's, people are humans, and humans are interesting creatures. Yeah. This is really, I hadn't known anything about this story when I got the book. I was not so sure what I was going to find in it, but I thought some of the details in the book were brought out much more than I saw on Wikipedia, or I saw the details of basic facts, but just the whole feeling behind it, especially the explanations for why he was kidnapped by the Russians, or why he was, murdered because because he was involved in a murder or because of CIA. Looking at all the way these stories developed, that's what I found fascinating. I'm like, yeah, get out of here. Yeah, but it's unfortunately people aren't paying attention to evidence and looking at what is most logical. There's a lot, things should follow logic when you come up with a theory. Any theory can be, you can look at the theory. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with saying, could this military life in Germany have anything to do with this disappearance? And you look at it, but to exaggerate his position in the military, to exaggerate his connections in the military, to exaggerate that anybody would be interested in his whole year of army work and his young age with no training. That's not logical. So, yeah, there's much more logical things, which is don't go drinking with certain guys, Let's see. Great. Everyone who said gay for pay and Pat's point about lots of money and makes it easier for conflicted to justify may not have put out next time and not have gone down well. Excuse the pun. Yeah, we will never know. It could just be, early version of Tinder. It's a hookup. And again, serial killers hook up with people if they can. And maybe that was maybe they had met before on some other occasion, and maybe that guy liked him. Maybe he liked that guy. Maybe they were attracted to each other. But he didn't know the guy was a serial killer, or the guy who had some kind of kink that was a little too kinky and didn't turn out well for him on the second time around. But one has to wonder if he got drunk with him the first time and was willing to go back out with him again and again, not go to a restaurant. If you want to talk to somebody, you think they're a little dangerous, or you don't want to be that intimate with them, you just don't go places alone with him. That restaurant was right there at West Point. You could just meet the dude at the restaurant. But he got in that guy's car. I'm going to say he got in that guy's car twice. So he had to have a reason for doing it. And if it's not the CIA, I'm going to say it's sex. It's much more logical. No, I can't prove it. Can't prove it. But if you're going to look for a reason for why this happened, the families and friends saying, "Oh no, there's no way." Well, there's a lot of women who were married to gay men for 20 years and then found out there for like one day, by the way, honey, I'm leaving you for another guy. But like, what? Not another woman? No, for a guy. Didn't know for 20 years. Have 3 kids. You had 3 kids with him. You had sex. Because again, let's just be honest here. Anything can turn a guy on. Rubbing up against something can turn a guy on. Doesn't have to be whatever, but that's a guy. They're very easily turned on compared to women. So yeah, maybe he'd prefer to have a dude, or maybe he had sex with a woman and just fantasized about a dude, So it's not like you can't be a man who cares about his wife. Now, there are gay men who said, I love my wife. I just, after 20 years, and now we're allowed to speak more truthfully. I'd rather be with a guy. I still love my wife, but just want sex with somebody else. So there's no reason why people could say, "Oh, I didn't." There's no way we would have known. No, you wouldn't have. You wouldn't have. There was even a weird story about him supposedly being caught when he was younger with some employee of a store in his town. Some employee of the store and him were caught in a sex act, and they fired the one guy, and then they kept it quiet. That's another story. Again, don't know if it's true, but it's a bunch of stories about him and people who are not females. Again, they could all be bullshit, but you got to wonder why he's meeting a dude. And I can't come up with a better reason. So I don't have any problem talking about this. I'm just trying to be cautious because it's YouTube. So it's not an embarrassing thing for me to talk about. It's YouTube. And I'm always trying to put things in a way that is not going to get my channel knocked off and get demonetized. That's what the real problem is. Lisa says Jim McGreevey, the first openly gay governor in U.S. history, resigned as governor in 2004 after coming out as gay American, admitting to an affair. Yeah, see, and probably said, "Oh, we had no idea." You know, and it's it must be difficult if you're in the military and you've got all those men around you and you're attracted to them and you can't do anything about it. I mean, it could be very tough. So, I mean, theoretically, you can have friends of the same, you can have friends of the opposite sex or the same sex or just friends. But that little line is always there, which is always the reason why there's issues about who beds in the same location as somebody else, who goes, that's always going to be an issue because humans are human. So, Ed Smart was married for 2 decades. Wait a minute. Are we talking about, what's her face? I'm blanking here. The girl who got kidnapped. Her father? Is that who you're talking about? Elizabeth Smart. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Elizabeth dad. Huh. Really? Interesting. There you go. Yeah. There you go. So that's the thing. It's not like, and if you have a situation where you can't afford to be honest and open about that, either your family, your religion, your work, you can shut up for a really long time. When people say, "Oh, people can't keep secrets," oh, yes, they can. They can keep secrets for decades. It's amazing what they can do. So do I believe he could have been gay and just, had when he had the opportunity, he was able to slip away and have some type of sexual activity he preferred? Yeah, possibly. Or perhaps he hadn't had that much opportunity and here it was and he couldn't resist it. I don't know. I mean, I just don't know. All I can say is the most logical explanation has nothing to do with his military career and has everything to do with something personal and not because somebody's killing him because he knew something from. It's all nonsense. So, oh, Lord. Anyway, that's going to be it for today. I thank you for being here. I thought it was a really interesting story. And some exaggerated stories, but very, very interesting. So thank you for being here. I'm sorry I changed the time on you for you people here live. I was having trouble with what day of the weekend, and I ended up having to move from Sunday back to Saturday. So there we go. Thank you. Yeah. Hit the like button if you're still here. Well, thank you. I'm glad you thought it was an interesting case. Was it illegal at some point? It was. Thank you for saying that. Yes, if you're still here and you're new to the channel, please do subscribe. That way you can support the channel and hit the bell for notifications. And as I always point out, check my playlist. I've done so many cases now, hundreds of cases now. Check my playlist. And if you have a specific case you're interested in, go to the search engine in YouTube and put in Profiler Pat Brown and the case you're interested in and see if I've already done it. Of course, if you're one of my patrons, send me along cases you think are really worth doing. And I'm making lists of them and I try to honor patrons first, but sometimes I can't remember. Sometimes it's just a matter of trying to figure out what case I think is most interesting at that moment in time. But if you're not a patron, you can still send along, when you're putting comments on case on my channel, you can always put a comment on, say, "Hey, have you thought about this case?" And mostly I do cases I find are good for profiling and doing crime scene analysis. And I don't do stories. So if there's nothing for me to talk about, there's no reason for me to even discuss the case. I can leave that to a storyteller. So a lot of cases everybody goes, "Oh my God, that's so interesting." I'm like, yeah, but it's like solved and there's nothing really to say about it. So, so I always look for the ones that have that little bit of something that makes me say, what is it that we could do to understand this case through profiling and crime scene analysis? So anyway, thank you for being here. And we'll be back either Wednesday or Thursday for the hangout. I think this is the 3 o'clock in the afternoon hangout. So Didn't I do 7 o'clock last time? Yeah. Yeah. So I try to go back and forth between like 7 and 3. So people in the UK and Europe can show up for some, and people in Australia and New Zealand can show up for others. But anyway, thank you all for being here, and love my patrons here. Makes for a very nice group, and yeah, you're all great. So, and I just want to say before I go, if somebody wants you to come out to their car and give you whiskey, just think twice. Might not end well. Bye.